The morning at Peppa Pig's house began as usual. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and Mummy Pig was making breakfast. Peppa and George sat at the table happily eating pancakes. Daddy Pig read the newspaper, snorting with satisfaction. Everything was peaceful, just like always. But something was different that day. George, normally cheerful and loud, was unusually quiet. He didn't ask for seconds, didn't laugh at Daddy Pig's jokes, and ignored his favorite toy, Dinosaur. Mummy Pig noticed first. "George, dear, are you all right?" she asked. He only nodded. His eyes were blank, and his smile looked painted on. Peppa tried to play with him, but he turned away, staring at nothing. At the playground, where laughter usually echoed, George stayed alone. He didn't run with Pedro Pony or jump in puddles with Rebecca Rabbit. His friends, Susie Sheep and others, tried to include him, but he just waved them off like he couldn't hear them. As days passed, George became worse. He avoided people, moved stiffly, and spoke in a flat tone. He stopped playing, drawing, or watching cartoons. The only thing that interested him was an old, worn book he found in the attic. He spent hours flipping through its pages, though it had no text or pictures, only strange symbols and patterns. Peppa tried to peek, but George clutched it tightly. His eyes were cold and distant, with no trace of his usual sparkle. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, Peppa heard strange noises from George's room. Not crying or laughter, something between a whisper and a rustle. She crept to the door and opened it slightly. George was sitting on the lower bunk, and above him, his dinosaur toy hung, gently swaying as if alive. George murmured to the book, his body trembling slightly. A strange smell filled the room, like old paper mixed with something Peppa couldn't place. A chill ran down her spine. She didn't know what was happening to her brother. The next morning, George was gone. His bed was empty, and the book lay open on the floor. On one page was a drawing that hadn't been there before, a silhouette of a piglet dissolving into the strange symbols. Peppa called Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig, but they only shrugged, thinking George was playing hide and seek. But Peppa knew better. Something had changed. The world felt wrong. Familiar sounds now seemed eerie. She stared at George's empty bed, her eyes full of something deeper than childish fear. Something had taken her brother. She didn't know if he'd ever return. And the scariest part, she began to notice how the shadows in the house grew longer, and the whispers became clearer. The lost episode of Peppa Pig that never aired. A sunny day illuminated Peppa Pig's house, filling it with familiar laughter. Peppa and George played in their room, where a bunk bed stood against the wall, George on the bottom, Peppa on top. Mummy Pig cooked in the kitchen, and Daddy Pig read the newspaper in the living room. Everything was as usual, but a slight, barely perceptible tension hung in the air. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and Daddy Pig went to open it. Dr. Octopus stood on the threshold, his tentacles ominously writhing. His gaze was unusually empty, and his movements stiff. He didn't smile as he always did. Dr. Octopus entered, his steps heavy and slow. He surveyed the room, his eyes resting on Peppa and George. The children felt a chill run down their spines. Mummy Pig tried to speak to Dr. Octopus, but he only made a strange guttural sound. His tentacles began to move faster, casting an eerie shadow on the wall. Peppa and George hid under the bed, their hearts pounding. They heard strange sounds from the living room, sounds that shouldn't have been in their house. Daddy Pig tried to protect his family, but Dr. Octopus was too strong. His tentacles grabbed Daddy Pig and he vanished into the darkness. Mummy Pig screamed, her voice full of terror. She tried to run, but Dr. Octopus was faster. She too disappeared, leaving the children alone. Peppa and George trembled with fear. Huddled together, they heard footsteps approaching their room. The door slowly opened, and a silhouette appeared in the doorway. It was Dr. Octopus, but now he looked different. His tentacles were longer, and his eyes glowed with an ominous red light. He extended his hand towards them. Peppa and George closed their eyes, awaiting their fate, but instead they felt a gentle touch. Dr. Octopus simply stroked their heads, his gaze full of sadness. Dr. Octopus slowly turned and left the room, leaving the children in silence. They didn't know what had happened, but they knew their lives would never be the same.